try and make it shorter than last week. Because you have the basic themes in hand by now, so it should go quicker. Okay, first of all, modern Poland, like modern Hungary, starts as a result of World War I and the post-war settlement, okay? Like Hungary, you have a totally distressed economy, but there are kind of similarities and differences between the Hungarian experience and the Polish experience. And you might notice some recurring themes as we're going through this. Poland has really distinctive-looking dictators. But this first guy is Joseph Pilsudski. When you see an L with a slash through it in Polish, it's pronounced more like a W. Okay. Pilsudski is a hero of the Russo-Polish War. He basically ends up the president of Poland by default, okay? One of the arrangements that the Poles make at the end of World War I, when they're an established country again for the first time since 1795, they've been split up between the Russian Empire, the Austrian Empire, and the Prussian Empire before then. They're going to have a democracy, and they end up with more of a parliamentary democracy. Now, this isn't poli-sci 924, but just something about parliamentary democracies, especially the ones that you have in Central Europe, okay, during the interwar. If you have things like direct proportional representation, universal manhood suffrage, and no electoral college, what you tend to have is a profusion of parties, okay? Now, Poland made a bid at a constitutional government in 1791. The empire's quashed it. So the Poles haven't had much experience ruling themselves in the previous 123 years. And the first parliamentary system they come up with is very, very inefficient. Their first prime minister, Ignaz Paderewski, is kind of like the Jimi Hendrix of concert pianists in that day. Okay, and it's kind of like the Czechs choosing Václav Havel to be their president when they get free of Slovakia. Okay, you have basically a cultural icon, somebody who can open doors, witty repartee, good conversationalist. But Paderewski is the politician, and things basically go down the tubes. Now, Pilsudski, like his Hungarian contemporary Admiral Horthy, is, well, he looks like a military strongman, and if normal Americans like you guys looked at his record, okay, after about 30 seconds you'd say, yep, military strongman, he's a dictator, okay. However, as is the case with Admiral Horthy in Hungary, if you talk to somebody from Poland, they might have more of a qualified opinion on that. They might disagree with you. They might say, something like, he was a military dictator, but we couldn't get any better of a deal at the time, okay? Because of all that instability. And Pilsudski, whether you liked him or not, did stabilize things. Actually, he didn't want to become a military strongman at first. He preferred more of a presidential system, okay? Presumably one with fewer political parties and fewer instances of confusion. See, if you have what the Poles had, what Weimar Germans had in the 1920s, you never have a majority, okay? The best that any political party could hope for in those circumstances is a pretty big plurality, but then you need to build a coalition, okay? If you have to build a coalition, sometimes very small, very radical, as Theodore Roosevelt would call them, lunatic fringe political factions have an undue amount of influence, okay? What if you have a 48% plurality and the only people you can get on your side are some nutcase radicals, okay, or nutcase fascists. You might have to do that to stay in power, okay? One of the reasons that you have a lot of streets in Poland named after this guy is he was a national hero. And he's a national hero because when the borders of Poland were being determined, next slide here. Uh-oh, what happened?
You have to click
All my graphics died.
You have to click into it.
I never had it.
Jacob is our resident IT.
Thank you. I'm glad I have something from the 21st century. Yeah,
Click this right quick.
I'm Ostergoth, okay? So you've got a situation where the Poles go to war against the Russians. Okay? And of course, the Bolsheviks had gotten out of World War I. They had made a separate peace with the Germans. Marshal Pilsudski thinks this is the time to expand Poland's borders. And the results of the Russo-Polish War are pretty much the eastern borders that Poland gets for the rest of the interwar years. He attacks the Ukraine, attacks part of White Russia, does pretty well. The Reds roll him back to the outskirts of Warsaw, and then, when it looks like the Polish military is about to collapse, they win that defensive battle, push the Red Army back into Russia. And I always like to point that out because when I was growing up in the 1960s, everybody used to tell jokes about the Polish Army. What's the shortest book of war heroes and all this kind of stuff. Actually, if you look at the Polish Army in World War II, I've been studying this stuff since I was about 8 years old. I've never found a suggestion of cowardice except among the high command. Okay, when those guys fought the Germans in 1939, they generally fought until they ran out of ammunition. Okay, so this guy won a war against the Sovs. Not that many people do that. And then once he wins the war, okay, he and his army win the war. He supports various nationalist movements to the east of Poland's borders, White Russia, the Ukraine, the Baltic states, thinking that if he can encourage nationalism in territory the Soviets claim, he can keep them weak and he can build a little buffer zone there. And you look at history books, they've always called this their Promethean plan. Kind of like Prometheus, he's going to smuggle fire out of heaven in a tube. And Pilsudski really was playing with fire there. Makes deals with the Russians and the Germans, the two major powers on either side of Poland. And there's something else about this guy, because interwar Poland is not without a fairly high degree of anti-Semitism, but Pilsudski keeps it under check pretty much, because see, his vision of post-World War I Poland is he wants it to be this multi-ethnic country. The absolute opposite of some of his opponents who were into more of an ethnic purity type routine. Okay, so we're kind of dodging a bullet that at least this guy was in power. But by 1926, he gives up on the Polish Republic. Stages a coup, didn't want to kill anybody, at least that's what his biographers say. Some people died in it, but it's nowhere near the kind of bloodshed that you have in post-World War I Hungary, where you have the Red Terror and then you have the White Terror, okay? His problem is that he doesn't groom successors successfully, okay? He kicks the bucket in 1935, doesn't make it till World War II, and by that time, his foreign minister, a guy named Joseph Beck, and the guy who has pretty much taken over running the army while Pilsudski runs the country is Edward Smigley-Ritz. Those two guys aren't as capable as leaders. Okay, Pilsudski had some charisma, enough charisma to keep what was in some cases a fairly diverse cultural mix together, and it's under his regime. Before 1935, there was anti-Semitism, but he pretty much managed to keep it under check. These other guys don't, okay? it really gets out of the tube, okay? And if you like short histories of World War II, there's a really good one. It's an oldie but goodie by B.H. Liddell Hart, which I kind of like him because he's an armored warfare guy. But Liddell Hart, very shrewd insights on diplomacy. He's talking about Joseph Beck and Smigley-Ritz. He says, these were, and I'll let Liddell Hart do his own talking here, men of dubious character and unstable judgment. And that's spot on, okay? So the condition that Poland's in when the Germans attack is it's still a military dictatorship, but the dictators are, not only are they allowing anti-Semitism, but they're making some very poor diplomatic deals, okay? Joseph Beck, this foreign minister, works out a deal with the Germans to, is this showing up? Yeah, to take some Czech territory right here with, basically with the Germans' permission. But the other part of the deal was Beck said, okay, we in Poland, we'll give up the Danzig corridor to Germany, which would unite the Brandenburg part of Germany and the Pomerania part of Germany with East Prussia here, but it'd take away Poland's access to the sea, okay? So the way this deal works out, March 1939, when the Germans grabbed the rest of Czechoslovakia, the Polish army put some troops right in this area, and according to this deal they had with the Germans, they knock off a chunk of Czechoslovakia. But then when the Germans say, okay, give us the Danzig corridor, Poland kind of flips them the bird, okay? In other words, if you're a military dictator, and Smigley-Ritz kind of tries to work a cult of the personality, but he doesn't do as well as Pilsudski had, okay? One of the things that you do, you see it numerous times in history where you have a small country with a dictatorship dealing with a big country. One of the ways the dictator in the small country stays popular is by tweaking the nose of the big country. See? So a lot of these very unwise diplomatic moves were actually done for short-term public consumption and short-term popularity. But this is where Liddell Hart's charge of unstable judgment comes in. They weren't really looking down the road too far. The Poles also made a deal with the British that basically locked the British into going to war if Germany attacked Poland. And nobody can really figure out whether it was dumber for the Poles to make that deal or it was dumber for the Brits to accept that deal. Neville Chamberlain's the Prime Minister of England at the time. Okay? So that's the pre-war backdrop. You basically have a military dictatorship with a lot of economic problems. Some of the problems were solved with by most favored nation status with the Germans. Okay, the Poles were not only trading with the Russians, but they're trading with Hitler and Germany, just as the Hungarians were. It's kind of a short-term prop-up, but it's going to cause long-term problems. Then, World War II, on the other hand, you can liken Pilsudski to Horthy, but World War II, the Polish experience is different, okay? You'll remember the Hungarians are basically an allied power to Nazi Germany until 1944 when they try to back out and the Germans occupy the place. Poland is attacked, and two things happen to Polish territory. Part of the territory is just gobbled up by Germany, and it officially becomes German territory. Now the other part of Poland, right in here, around Krakow, where you're going, is called the General Government. That's occupied Poland, okay? Under the charge of Hans Frank. You've probably read a little bit about him. He ended up at the end of a rope as a result of the Nuremberg trials, okay? So that's the situation. Poland is attacked right off the bat. At the very least, 400,000 soldiers died. At least 2.5 million civilians. Nobody really knows how many Poles died in that war. Most of them very early on. okay? Now, meanwhile, in Poland, you have resistance, okay? And if you could get Dan's to come in and talk about his father, that would really be, I'd like to hear that, okay? You've got people still in Poland, the stay-behinds, people who didn't go off to England and become part of the government in exile there, people who didn't go off to Moscow and become part of the communist cadre that Moscow was going to send back in after the war. But the people, manning the Polish resistance, they're from all political factions, okay? If you look at World War II, countries occupied by the Nazis, the Poles had the most robust resistance going. Very possibly because they were the most desperate country in occupied Europe. Okay? So they got worse treatment than anybody else. Okay? Now, which of these factions is going to win out? Here's where location matters. Okay? The government in exile in London, the one that the Brits and the Americans are willing to back, to be honest with you, their problem is they just can't get back to Poland soon enough after the war is over because the Red Army moves into Poland. That's the Allied army that liberates Poland, and that gives the communist cadres trained in Moscow, Poles that relocated to Moscow during the war, a leg up, and the Lublin government, those people, they're the ones that who are actually going to run Poland after the war. Okay, but even they have to make a concession, at least at first. Okay, yeah, they've got the Red Army's presence backing them up. Also, and somebody was talking about this before class, the Soviets, to call them disingenuous is an understatement. On the one hand, if you get the 5-minute quick and dirty treatment about World War II, well, theoretically, the Poles and the Soviets are on the same side. Okay? They're allied powers. You look at the Polish airmen and Polish soldiers who got out of Poland and fought the rest of the war on numerous fronts. Okay, yeah, certainly they're allies. But the Russians are thinking about, well, what do we want after the war in Poland? We certainly don't want Polish leaders that aren't pliant, that won't follow the party line when Moscow tells them to jump. We want people to say how high, basically. Okay? So, one of the 44 Warsaw Uprising, the Red Army just stops on the east bank of the Vistula and lets the Polish resistance fight till it runs out of ammunition and the Nazis clean it up. Okay, so that's you might say duplicitous, not just disingenuous, right? And you also have the Katyn massacre. That happens very early in 1940, when according to a treaty before the war, the Poles, or the Russians and the Germans had basically split Poland in half, one power to occupy each side. Well, the Germans attacked first, so a lot of people escaped from Western Poland to Eastern Poland. That was after 1st September. 17 September, the Russians move in from the other side. They round up escaped Polish army officers, escaped Polish intellectuals, doctors, lawyers, anybody they possibly thought might be the germ of a leadership cadre in post-war Poland. They either sent to the gulags or liquidated. 22,000 people killed outright. Okay? Most of them army officers, some political figures, priests. Nobody knows how many priests the Soviets killed. Okay, and we probably never will know. And of course, the Soviets didn't admit to any of this stuff until 1990. Okay, until after when the Soviet Union was collapsing, then some of the Soviet historians released some state papers, and they kind of fessed up. Okay, so that's what's happening, and yet. Even though the people from Moscow get their way and get to call the shots on the post-war government, and yeah, you've probably read in some places how the Poles really resented the West for kind of selling them out. It's understandable that they'd say that, but there's really nothing the West could do because the Russians had at least 81 divisions in Poland, and there's no way the West could have done anything about it militarily, like forcing the Russians to have free elections. FDR demanded it, and Stalin basically said no. On the other hand, the Soviets didn't get to take reparations out of the western part of Germany either, so that was the deal there. Okay? But a Polish officer, a PPK, a political officer of the Polish Communist Party that did participate in the resistance and did stay in Poland during the war, gets to be the party chief in the first few years after the war. I've got his picture coming up next. Another happy dictator. This is Władysław Gomułka, and this is the guy who was actually locked up by Pilsudski, put in jail in the 1930s, ran a kind of call it a shadow government in Warsaw, right during the war when the Nazis were occupying Warsaw. And he's basically does for Poland what Rákosi does for Hungary. Fixes the elections in '46, turns Poland into a one-party state, much as Rákosi did. Actually, his takeover is a lot less bloody than the one in Hungary, but several hundred opponents are liquidated or made to disappear. The Polish secret police is called the SB. Okay, so there's a similar theme there if you're looking for common threads, as it were. This guy is replaced in '48 by a Moscow-trained product. Okay, kind of a sop to the Polish people who had to stay in Poland during the war and endure the Nazis. But once the people in Moscow in the Comintern figure they can get Gomułka out of there, they do. Okay, now it's just as well for this individual's reputation that they did kick him out. Okay, they didn't shoot him, they didn't hang him like they did Nagy. They let him live, but he's discommended and moved to a less sensitive post, like kicked out of the party temporarily. You've probably read enough to know how they do things by now. Another common thread. But what happens is the economy goes all haywire, right? That's one of the common themes we were talking about before class. What's the biggest common denominator in lousy standard of living? Okay, you have what Polish economists and Hungarian economists they call it a number of things. Some of them not really polite, but the term you hear most often translates into shortage economy or economy of shortages, something like that. From '48 to '56 in Poland, and really the rest of the Eastern Bloc too, that's pretty much what you have. It's a syndrome, okay? There are certain symptoms that you're going to see, the same symptoms in different countries, sometimes in slightly different proportions, but the same symptoms are always there, okay? Consumer goods, you've got too few of them, okay? Now, if you have too few consumer goods, it might be because the prices were cheap and the stuff sold out, but no, if you ask a Polish economist or a Hungarian economist, they'll say, no, it's because not enough stuff was available in the first place, okay? Now, if not enough stuff is available and the prices are fixed, because this is an economy based on central planning, all the prices are fixed, okay? You end up standing in line for stuff. Okay? In a market economy, if you had stuff that was in really profusion, you had a lot of it, the prices would drop and it would sell out. If you had a little bit of it, the prices would go up. But here, because they control the prices, and they control them even during peacetime, not just during wartime. Okay? Even capitalist countries have price controls during wartime. Okay? You end up standing in line. Now, look at how that affects the economy further. It's kind of a ripple effect, and you know, somebody like Chuck Fisher would cringe when I oversimplify economics in a history class. But okay, let's say, okay, we're talking shortage economy here. You know, you live in Krakow and you have to stand in line for 3 hours to get a couple of rolls of toilet paper. Okay? Well, what if you're one of the guys who works at the toilet paper factory? See? Now, sometimes to get regular goods, you have to stand in line all day. Well, that adds up to absenteeism from your job, and so this problem of no consumer goods just compounds itself. And you know, sometimes you're not even talking about consumer goods. You know, you're talking about not having enough food. You know, in the 1970s, 1950s, 60s, and 70s, you have hunger demonstrations. You had hunger demonstrations in the 1980s. Even after solidarity is surfaced, okay? So consumer goods, you don't have those. As was the case in Hungary, any kind of strategically significant raw material that the Poles had got taken out of Poland and ended up in the Soviet Union. And the Poles have, they've got a lot of coal deposits, a lot of iron ore deposits, and now they also had steel mills, okay? But a lot of the raw materials end up at Soviet steel mills. So, you know, that affects employment in Poland. And, you know, what you have as a result of that is you have this huge trade deficit where the Sovs are doing really, really well, and the Poles are always running a deficit, okay? And, of course, Poland, well, the USSR is Poland's biggest trading partner through all this. And because the Soviets control Polish policy, it's very, very difficult for the Poles to modify their economy so it actually works. You know, something that you see especially a lot of in Czech history too. You know, one of the problems with a shortage economy is, say, if you're waiting for an apartment, if you're waiting for a place to live, you might wait 4 or 5 years. Okay, and you know, we're not talking about you know, some super deluxe condo. We're talking about places that are much, at least one quantum leap worth than your average college town slum apartment. Okay, you know, at least, you know, your plumbing usually works. You know, these places are not very nice. You gotta wait 5 years anyway. And you know, part of the cultural fallout of that is you have a lot of people who want to get married and can't get married because they physically cannot find a place to live. Okay, wages frozen and prices go up. See, one of the, you know, when this economic situation starts to get out of control, you see this in the 50s, you see it in the 60s, you see it in the 70s. The way these governments react, and it usually doesn't matter, you know, who's on the hot seat at the time, is they'll say, okay, we've got to put a stop on wage increases. Okay, oh, but the prices, they're going to go up, and this is what finally irritates enough people at the shipyards to kick off solidarity. It's that particular feature of the shortage economy. You know, even more than working conditions needing improvement, planned improvements that the government doesn't dictate. Okay, you know, these guys don't have OSHA. You know what I'm talking about? Well, they don't have. They wouldn't know what I was talking about. So that's a shortage economy, a set of symptoms that you really have in all these places, and. What the government's going to do about it, usually these governments don't do anything about it until things are just about to fall apart. At the last minute, they'll try something. 1956, in Poznan, which is, you know, Posen in German, it's the major industrial city in western Poland and the salient there. Okay? There are steel mills there, metalworking places, and you get some demonstrations. Now, the demonstrations in Poznan, it's not like Hungary where you had it all over the country. But you had strikes, you had riots. At one time, they sack the local party headquarters, and then they get scaling ladders, and they climb over the walls of the local prison, and they let all the political prisoners out. Fun stuff, unless you're a party official. You've got to figure out what to do about it, okay? Now, one thing that's similar to what happens in Hungary that you've read about is you get a severe army crackdown. Now this one's by the Polish army, however. Now, when I say Polish army, there's a little asterisk after that. The guy who's running the Polish defense ministry at that time is a Soviet field marshal named Konstantin Rokossovsky. And if you look at these Britannica or Google treatments of Polish history, it mentions the Poznan Nine and what happens as a reaction to this labor unrest in this industrial city. One of the things that's demanded of the rioters is get rid of Rokossovsky. There are all these signs saying, Rokossovsky, go home. What a lot of these sources don't tell you is that Marshal Rokossovsky is a Polish ethnic, okay? He's Polish, but he's from the part of Poland that's now behind the Soviet border. So, sometimes Polish ethnics were arrayed against Polish ethnics, okay? But Rokossovsky pretty much following the party line here, which is something you do if you want to live, if you're in the Red Army. You don't really have a choice. When you're in the Red Army and you don't complete a mission or you don't do what your boss tells you, you get fired, okay? You understand getting fired Soviet style, okay? Like a pistol shot to the base of the skull usually, right? Okay, so they're going to get rid of him, but, and another thing they do is they bring back Gomułka, okay? Now remember Imre Nagy in Hungary, they brought him back in '56 when the toothpaste started getting out of the tube, because he was the only guy that the revolutionaries trusted and the party regulars in Moscow trusted. Kind of a default position. You might not be really happy about it, but he's really your only choice. So they rehabilitate him, they prop him back up, they put him in charge of the Communist Party in Poland, okay? Now notice what he does, and you'll understand why the Poles don't get cracked down on the way the Hungarians do. First of all, when Nikita Khrushchev brings a delegation to Poland to hash things out with the Polish Communist Party, Gomułka tells them, okay, we understand that there are Soviet troops in Poland. We don't mind having them there, okay, which is kind of a different take than the Hungarians had. But, he says, if the Soviets shoot, I guarantee you the Polish people will shoot back, okay? On the other hand, unlike Nagy in Hungary, Gomułka assures the Soviets, he says, look, we don't want to leave the Warsaw Pact. We don't want to take Marshall Plan money from the West, thereby isolating the Soviet Union, okay? We don't want to do any of these things that you would consider provocative, okay? But they do get rid of that defense minister. So that's basically what happens there. And it's why Gomułka survives. And when they try the rioters, it's called the Poznan Nine. It's a famous trial in Polish history. There aren't any death sentences, okay? I think there are 9 people tried. The worst sentence was 6 years at hard labor, okay? So apparently the Moscow Party regulars liked what they were hearing from this guy, at least for the time being. They let him slide, okay? Yeah, I'll remain in the Warsaw Pact. I won't try to sidle up with the West. And actually, one of the byproducts of the '56 revolt was that the Soviets actually ended up cutting the Poles a little bit of slack, and they did trade with the West a little bit after that, okay? It's almost like a parallel to goulash communism in Hungary after '56. The people who made the trouble, we'll slap them around. We've got to throw somebody under the bus, but by the same token, we don't want another revolution. We're going to cut people a little bit more slack from now on. So that's Gomułka, and you know, he wrote about his experiences, and he talks about the Polish road, what he calls the Polish road to socialism. Okay, you know, much like Nagy talking about evolutionary communism. In other words, we still believe in communism, we still believe it's a superior system, but it has to be adapted to our culture. You know, you can't have communism in Poland exactly the same as communism in Russia. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. And you know, one reason it's not a one-size-fits-all thing is the Catholic Church in Poland. It's you know, there's no equivalent in America except maybe the Puritan Church in Massachusetts in 1630. Okay, the Catholic Church in Poland has a lot of influence, a lot more influence even than the Catholic Church has in Hungary. Okay, and so one of the things Gomułka and his successor tried to do was kind of cut the Catholic Church from some slack. You know, in the late 1940s. A lot of times when they have a communist takeover, the first thing they do is they expropriate church property and all that. Well, some of that actually changed hands and got given back to the church. Okay, but you know, to just kind of get ahead of the game a little bit, you see the dialectical problem that's building here. Okay, communist. If you're a doctrinaire Marxist-Leninist, you don't believe in God. Okay. If you're Catholic, you do believe in God. So you've got this very, very heavily Catholic country that purports to be a one-party system and purports to be communist. Okay? You can see how push might really will come to shove in the next few years because of that. Okay? It's a systemic problem that the leaders have to work with, and they don't really have a way around it. Okay? So 1960 to 1970, because I'm trying to speed this up, basically they have the same kind of cycle. Because you know, Gomułka and after him, Gierek, his successor, they try some reforms, they try to loosen things up, but then you've got the shortage economy. They couldn't really change the system enough to solve the shortages. Okay? You still have a housing problem. You still have workers that are underpaid and facing price increases. And yeah, when it gets to be a price increase on something like food, we're not talking about people having to wait another year to save up for a TV or something. Okay, not that you'd be able to watch anything useful on TV in the Eastern Bloc anyway. I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to editorialize. But I am an escapee from the Cold War, and I have these prejudices with me still. But I suppose if you talk to somebody from Poland who lived during that era, you know, they were sick of the propaganda too. You look at what happens during the 1980s when Solidarity goes underground, when Jaruzelski slaps 2 years worth of martial law on the country of Poland. But you still have something like between 70 and 150,000